Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that the thought of them hiding a monstrous secret felt impossible? We think of our doctors as healers, the ones who soothe pain, cure illness, and guard our health when our bodies betray us. But what happens when the very person sworn to protect life is secretly obsessed with testing the limits of it? Tonight, on Curell Case Files, we uncover a story so unsettling that it rewrites what a community thought it knew about its most respected figure. This is the story of Dr. Malcolm Hargrove, the man who healed by day and experimented by night. Dr. Hargrove's name had been spoken with reverence in the small Midwestern town of Coldwater. For over 4 decades, he was the physician everyone trusted. He delivered babies, patched up farm injuries, prescribed medicine, and calmed anxious parents who brought their sick children to his clinic on Main Street. People described him as kind but distant, never rude, always professional, but guarded in ways that nobody questioned. After all, everyone assumed that doctors carried a heavy weight. When he died at the age of 79, the town mourned. His funeral was one of the largest Coldwater had ever seen. Former patients, generations of families, even local officials attended. They laid flowers and remembered him as the man who kept the community healthy through harsh winters and flu outbreaks. Yet while the town wept, Dr. Hargrove's home sat silent, holding truths darker than anyone dared imagine. It began with the estate sale. The doctor had lived alone since his wife's passing in the early 1980s. His only son had moved far away and had no interest in returning to the house. That left the responsibility to a team of cleaners and organizers who entered his property expecting nothing more than a dusty collection of books and medical instruments. What they found instead would set off a chain of events that shook Coldwater to its core. Inside the basement, a space no one had seen in decades, there was a locked steel door. The workers assumed it was a storm shelter. After forcing it open, they discovered a laboratory, shelves lined with medical jars, anatomical charts, surgical instruments, and a wooden desk covered in notebooks. The air was heavy with a chemical stench, preserved somehow by time. On one side of the room stood an operating table with restraints bolted into its frame. At first, the crew assumed it was a relic from the doctor's early career, perhaps an old study space. But as they opened the notebooks, they realized this was not history. It was confession. Dr. Hargrove had documented every detail of his private work. Thousands of pages, each filled with tidy handwriting, charts, sketches, and observations. These were not research notes intended for publication. They were personal, secretive, and chilling. The doctor described procedures he had conducted not on animals, but on human beings. The first entries dated back to 1965, shortly after he inherited his father's house and converted the basement into what he called the workshop. His tone was clinical, detached, yet laced with something obsessive. He wrote of testing the limits of endurance, of examining the edge between survival and silence. He recorded experiments on patients he identified only by initials, describing how he administered unusual combinations of sedatives, stimulants, and experimental compounds. The most horrifying entries were not about drugs, they were about surgery. Hargrove wrote about incisions made without anesthetic, about monitoring the nervous system's responses to trauma, about how long the body could survive after losing certain functions. He detailed how patients drifted away mid-procedure, followed by his own analysis of why they failed to survive. As investigators later learned, many of these patients had names, people who had vanished from Coldwater over the years. Adults who went missing after visiting the clinic, drifters and travelers who never made it home, even some elderly patients who were declared dead of natural causes, but whose final hours may have been spent strapped to the table in his basement. For decades, these disappearances were written off as tragic, but explainable. Some were said to have moved away. Others were believed to have died in accidents or left town quietly. Nobody ever suspected the town doctor. Why would they? He was the man who gave free checkups to children when their families couldn't pay, the man who donated to the church roof fund, the man who stood on parade floats waving to the very people he was secretly using as subjects. The truth unraveled slowly after the estate sale workers turned the journals over to the police. Detectives poured through thousands of pages, cross-referencing dates with missing persons reports. The match was undeniable. A widow named Helen Klein, who disappeared in 1971 after a routine appointment. A farmer's hired hand, listed in Hargrove's notes as Subject J, who was last seen in 1978. A traveling salesman whose abandoned car was found 2 counties away. His case marked suspicious but inconclusive. Each time, the journals described procedures performed on bodies that aligned with those disappearances. But the doctor's writings revealed more than crimes. They revealed obsession. Hargrove seemed to believe he was on the cusp of groundbreaking discoveries. He wrote about unlocking resilience, about mapping the architecture of suffering. He was fascinated with what he called the threshold, a line between life and death that he wanted to document and extend. His notes suggested he wasn't motivated by malice or thrill. He was motivated by control, by the pursuit of knowledge that no ethical system would ever allow. What made the revelations even more chilling was the normalcy with which he lived outside his hidden world. For every night he descended into his basement to record another horrific entry, he spent mornings greeting townsfolk at the clinic, treating children with ear infections, and comforting families at hospital bedsides. The duality was almost unimaginable, healer above, tormentor below. When the story broke, Coldwater erupted in disbelief. Families who once praised his care now wondered if their relatives had been among his victims. The funeral that had celebrated his life became an open wound. Graves were exhumed, autopsies revisited, and the town began to realize the scale of betrayal. One discovery stood out above all. In his later years, Hargrove wrote less about procedures and more about philosophy. He seemed haunted by what he had done. In one entry from 2003, he wrote, "They trusted me. That was the currency I stole. Not their bodies, but their faith. I wonder if God will know the difference." To this day, nobody knows exactly how many people lost their lives in the doctor's basement. Official estimates place the number between 12 and 20. Some of the initials in his journals have never been connected to known victims. Others may never be identified at all. What is certain is that Dr. Malcolm Hargrove was not just Coldwater's doctor. He was its nightmare, hidden in plain sight. The house was demolished in the years that followed, after neighbors could no longer bear to see it standing. The ground where his workshop once stood is now an empty lot, grass sprouting where stone walls once echoed with unspeakable sounds. Locals say the air around it feels heavy, as if the soil itself remembers. And yet, perhaps the most disturbing legacy is not the victims we know of, but the possibility of those we never will. Each unopened page in those journals is a reminder of how easily evil can wear the face of trust. This has been the Doctor's Hidden Experiments, a story of trust betrayed, secrets unearthed, and the terrifying realization that the people we depend on most may carry darkness we cannot see. You've been watching Curell Case Files. If you found this story unsettling, remember to subscribe, share, and join the conversation. What would you have done if you discovered the journals of your town doctor? Would you want to know the full truth, or would ignorance have been safer? Leave your thoughts below, and until next time, stay observant, stay cautious, and never stop asking questions.